different name, and this has served to just confuse us. When all is said and done, to be one's our revolution. We never stand alone.
Such a wonderful opportunity because I am a living testimony to the power of Dr. Donald H. Smith. I walked in to his classroom at Chicago Teachers College, where he demanded excellence to the nth degree. I followed in his footsteps because he was who I wanted to be. And I followed in his footsteps through the junior college, through the university, and finally to the Center for Inner City Studies, which he almost single-handedly launched. And today I am so proud to welcome you to what my colleagues calls DuSable Town, the home of now the Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies, the home of the DuSable Museum, the place where saving the African American child has been a tradition for at least as long as I've been here, and I've been here as long as he's been here. So I thank you and I welcome you, and certainly we are looking forward to Dr. Donald H. Smith, my professor, my mentor, my friend.
Just like to say welcome. I'd like to give a special welcome to Dr. Donald Smith. Much love. I'm going to be very brief. When I first met Phil, I started being his mentor, I think, or one of his mentors, and now he's mentoring me. This brother gets in so much trouble. I mean, what he said is true. If you're looking for trouble, call Phil. I said, Phil, your table is too full. He said, I just get a larger table. So this brother, you know, he's done so much, and I'm so thankful that I'm a friend, that I'm a brother. I just like to say, I wrote down something, and I just like to make this statement. We as the black community must come together and reconcile our differences and place as our highest priority the welfare, education, and spiritual development of our children. To do anything less is inexcusable and will constitute an act of racial suicide. I'd like to leave you with that statement, and welcome to Chicago again. You may not get a chance to go in the hood, but some of the hood will be coming here, I think, Friday night.
There's one of them brothers from Sacramento with the Parallel Board of Education in the room. Sacramento, there they go. So they put together, you know, a parallel Board of Education. Apparently, the Sacramento Board of Education wasn't serving black children. And so they said, okay, and while they didn't dismantle the Sacramento board, they put together a parallel board. Well, I'm for that. And so what we've done here in Chicago, we've put together a parallel education system. I mean, you know, okay, so the kids got to go to your schools. You got laws saying the kids got to be in your schools during the week. Well, on Saturdays, we run our own school system. It's called Saturday University. We run 16 sites right now. We're on our way up to 25 sites of Saturday University, where we teach our children, where we control the curriculum, we control the teachers, we control the content. That's what time it is. Now, you know, a lot of people say, well, why should we have to teach our children? Oh, man. And let me give you the simple answer. Because if you don't, they will be destroyed. Now that's a simple answer. And so that's one of the things that we do. I see a lot of the great educators, a lot of the great people from Chicago in the room, and I'm not going to mention them all. I just want to take us out of here in my own little way, and some people know how we do it. We do it. It's called educate or die. Educate or die. 500 years ago, my people made the trip from the shores of Mother Africa. My people, they was ripped, separated from our families, forced across the seas, dying from hunger, lash of the whip, but most of all, disease. We died by tens of millions so that others were sure to thrive. We made the Middle Passage where only the strong survive. Because our bodies were strong and other people wanted to get paid. Because our skin was black, they made us into slaves. For 350 years, my people worked for free, building this great country so that others could be wealthy. Wherever you stand in this country is related to my ancestors' blood. Now, we can't get no help during the New Orleans flood. My people, I tell you no lie, we only got two choices in this world. We will either educate or we will die. My spirit remembers crimes against my people for which they won't repent. And all the work my ancestors did for free, and now I can't pay the rent. And even with all this pain and suffering, I ain't mad. Just don't tell me that every young black boy is bad. Our children go to schools where they don't learn how to read. And jobs, they ain't hiring my people because they said they ain't got the need. And my thugs, they on the corner selling that blow weed and crack. My sisters having babies, they don't know if the damn daddy is Joe, John, or Jack. We are in trouble. And it ain't hard to see as I walk around my neighborhood watching crackheads pee. We are in trouble. And unless we make a change, ain't gonna be no more good black people. And we will be the blame. My people, I tell you no lie. We only got two choices in this world. We will either educate or we will die. Today is the time for us to start to make that move. Like Moses said in the Bible, we better get in a group. God ain't playing with us this time. He will wipe us off this earth unless we value his word and we put his will first. It's time for a change. Wisdom and knowledge is the key. Forget all them bad habits we done picked up on B.E. and go back to school this year and make education job one. And if we just study a little bit, we will find that education is fun. And so as I look out onto you, my vision, it becomes clear. I see future doctors, lawyers, bankers. I see an engineer. And so when you go to school this year, remember, it's not just for you. It's for your children. It's for your grandchildren. But it's for your ancestors too. My people, much love. But I tell you no lie. We only got two choices in this world. We will either educate or we will die.
It was 1984. Under the leadership and signature of Dr. Don H. Smith, the National Alliance of Black School Educators issued the report, Saving the African American Child. I want us to note that it declared the removal of the hyphen to emphasize the rupture of Africans in the United States from Mother Africa. And it unequivocally made the inextricable link between cultural and academic excellence as the imperative of education for African American children. In the name of our dear ancestors, colleagues that I was privileged to journey with, Nana Barbara Sizemore and Baba Asa Hilliard, and all those who labored with the spirit of the mission of NAPSI, I declare the National Black Education Agenda Summit opened. Thank you very much. There is another elder in our midst who needs no introduction. He is one who has taught hundreds, if not thousands, made so many PhDs, has epitomized what it means to be an interdisciplinary scholar that affirms the wisdom, the tenacity, the genius of our people. And we have asked him to introduce our illustrious, esteemed elder speaker for the evening. Dr. Abdullah Lim Shabazz, we honor you, we welcome you, and we thank you.
We give you in the hands of this esteemed black man who is a supreme educator and has supreme concern for all of our people and certainly our children. Dr. Smith.
I'd like to recognize again Dr. Sam Anderson and ask him to stand. Sam, will you please stand? Sam is one of the major standard bearers for black educational liberation. I thank all of the summit planners for all you have done and all that you are pledged to do. You've brought to this summit educational activists from across the country, united in determination to save the African American child. You've already heard from Dr. Lynn Jeffries, a distinguished African scholar. I'll say a little more about Lynn later. I also want to introduce again one of my many students from the Chicago area. Many years ago, when I taught at Crane Junior College, one of my students sitting in front of us now was Dr. Gloria Latimore-Peace. Dr. Peace. I salute a few close friends now departed, whose friendship and brilliance, whose educational vision for our people has helped to guide me and many others in the work we have done and the work we must do. I honor Dr. Virginia F. Lewis, about whom I will say more later. She was the principal of Wendell Phillips High School in Chicago, who mentored me. Dr. Asa G. Hilliard, Dr. Barbara A. Sizemore, Dr. Alfred B. Pasteur, and Lucille Heron Montgomery, my 5th grade teacher. They were my models, my friends, my guideposts. In spite of the joy I feel in being home, the exhilaration of addressing you and the passion of our mission, I also feel sorrow and express my deepest sympathy to the parents and communities who've lost their children in the gang wars and police killings on the streets of Chicago, Miami, Detroit, Oakland, most of these youths innocent victims. I feel sorrow and express deepest sympathy for our children all over America who are destroyed not only on the streets, but also in the schools of America. I have deep anguish for the children and youth we're trying to save because they are me. But for the grace of God, I could have been one of those children growing up in the clutches of poverty. My early life was no crystal stair. As a child, I was raised by my mother alone, who gave birth to me at 19 years old. We lived in tenements on the south side of Chicago. Later, fortunate to move to the new project named after the great Ida B. Wells. We were on welfare, then called relief, and survived on food stamps. Yes, my little mother and I were moochers that Mitt Romney despises. There was no TV, no air conditioning, no refrigeration, only a single room and an icebox, shared bathroom. I knew who my father was, a college-trained professor of music. The few times I saw him, he never spoke to me, never kissed me, never touched me. Most of the time, my father worked 1,000 miles away. He died when I was 12. Had it not been for my brilliant black teachers at Wendell Phillips Elementary School who taught and nurtured me, especially little 4'8" Lucille Montgomery, and my social worker, Louis Caldwell, who told me I was a strong boy, I don't know how I would have survived and become the man I am. When I attended a mostly white high school with all white teachers, I received no praise, no encouragement. The one bright moment was when my 9th grade English teacher took our honors class to my first legitimate stage play, Othello. Other than the champion Joe Louis, whom I saw often when he stayed at the Vienna bathhouse on my street, I enrolled at DePaul University. I worked 7 nights a week at the U.S. Post Office, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., had some breakfast, slept for about 5 hours, did the readings and my assignments, attended class at DePaul, and back to the post office. It was a staggering pace, but becoming a teacher had become the most important thing in my life. No more tenements, no more rats and roaches, a job. I could look forward to a decent life, one which would allow me to help poor young people as I had been, even if I could not be a child psychologist. Once I completed student teaching and passed the English teacher's exam, I learned that I was scheduled to be assigned as the first black teacher at a predominantly white high school. I literally begged the Phillips principal, the extraordinary black genius, Dr. Virginia F. Lewis, to have my assignment changed to Wendell Phillips, where I could serve the mostly impoverished black students as I had been. I needed to be with my own people. Many of the students were sharing my own childhood and youth experience, and I was fortunate to be mentored by this great principal. Dr. Lewis finished second among thousands who took the principal's exam. I suspect she was docked a few points for being female and black. She finished first among a group of administrators selected nationally for the initial Harvard doctoral program in school administration. Though many of her teachers were brilliant black women and men, that included a teacher of chemistry who had helped to develop the atomic bomb, and a teacher of mathematics who was one of the Tuskegee Airmen. On my last day at Phillips, the most poignant experience of my professional life occurred. I had already been given a farewell party by my honors English class, as I left early to begin on time in the doctoral program at the University of Wisconsin. After the first week at Madison, I returned to the high school to close out my counseling office for the final time. As I sat at my desk, I heard a rustling outside the door. One by one, the students from my freshman honors class came into the office, said nothing, placed a piece of fruit on my desk, turned without a word, and left. The last boy placed his fruit, said nothing, and his tears began to flow. I was choked and overwhelmed by the love of my students. That last boy created the first black house on an Ivy League campus, was the first Black Rhodes Scholar from the city of Chicago, earned his law degree from Harvard, and is a judge on the West Coast. Those of you who live in the San Diego area would know him. One of my girls in another class became Deputy Assistant Secretary of Labor under President Clinton. Another girl in that class became principal of the University of Chicago Laboratory School, where the Obama children attended. Her husband, also my student, is an attorney. Among my many high-achieving students was a girl who achieved her doctorate, became a principal, and a college professor. She once wrote me a handwritten 8-page letter thanking me because I had faith and believed, and these are her words, that a fat, dark-skinned girl could be excellent. One of my boys became chief of police. When I accepted the invitation to address the class, the 40th anniversary of the class of 1961, one of the most prominent members of the class was absent. The last time I had seen him was at a lecture by civil rights hero Stokely Carmichael in 1963. He was tall and dashiki with a big afro. He was all city in basketball and voted the most popular boy in his class. He came over to me and shook my hand. There was no warmth. He was angry, as many black youth were angry during the civil rights movement. Some very angry. His teacher was also angry. In fact, at the height of the movement, the distinguished psychologist, Dr. Kenneth B. Clark, wrote an article in the New York Times in which he postulated that any black person in America who was not angry was not mentally healthy. Dr. Clark and his wife, Dr. Mamie Clark, had earlier become famous for the seminal research which was later introduced as evidence in the Brown decision outlawing segregation. Dr. Clark's research had found that black girls most often preferred white dolls rather than black dolls. Dr. Clark concluded that racial segregation resulted in black girls not liking themselves or other black people like themselves. My angry high school student, most popular in his class, was driving in his own neighborhood, big afro and dashiki, when he was stopped for a second occasion by a black policeman known for his reputation of intimidating other black people. My student was ordered out of his car. He complied with a gun in his hand and shot the cop dead. He's been in prison for 49 years, having escaped being put to death because the state of Illinois outlawed death sentences. We write often. In prison, he's become a Muslim, following the path of Malcolm X. He reads voluminously and writes brilliantly with a genius I did not recognize in my 2 courses with him. One of my letters described the pain I felt over the murder of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, a black boy who planned to go to college and make something of himself, a life snuffed out by a white racist would-be state protector of white supremacy. Tragically, too many of our youth are killed by the keepers of white privilege or kill each other because of devaluation of themselves and others like themselves. An opportunity I learned about quite by accident and seized upon enabled me to found the Center for Inner City Studies in Chicago. Conrad Worrell made reference to that. He's now one of the directors who followed me. When we opened the center in 1966, its purpose was to teach inner city students and other public servants, including a few policemen, how to inspire and educate children and youth of African descent and other youth of impoverished environments, to help these youngsters value themselves and others like themselves. I received a number of competitive federal grants, and we trained local and national educators to work effectively with our students, though I can't say we were successful with all those we tried to help. The name of just so many students just comes into the names just come into my head. I was blessed to recruit an extraordinary faculty, which included Chicago principal Dr. Barbara A. Sizemore, later superintendent of schools in Washington, D.C., Dr. Nancy L. Arnaz, later Dean of Education at Howard University, Dr. Sonia Stone, later Director of Black Studies at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, for whom the Black Studies Center at UNC is named, Dr. Don Bailey, whom I brought in as Assistant Director, psychologist Dr. Edward J. Barnes, and Dr. Anderson Thompson, Professor Emeritus at the Center for Inner City Studies. I have to mention that Anderson and I met as we taught summer school at DuSable 2 summers. And we both attended a conference in Arizona. And as we were flying back to Chicago, we had quite a conversation. And I said to Anderson, "You know, Anderson, we don't compliment and support often enough our brothers and sisters who stand by the gate to protect us, putting their own lives at risk. We have to do more to show how much we care for what they are doing for us." Do you remember that, Anderson? All right, yeah, I hope you would say that. We were a team that worked well together, that respected each other. Each week, different faculty conducted a seminar to educate each other and to discuss the needs of our graduate students. We were voracious readers, consuming everything we could get our hands on about Black history and culture. Dr. Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro was out of print, but Barbara was able to get a mimeograph copy, which we passed around and carefully protected. The father of Negro history warned us, when you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. He will find his proper place and he will stay in it. You do not need to send him to the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, he will protest until one is made for his use. His education demands it. Dr. Woodson's words are as meaningful today. Many other great Black scholars have written of the treachery, the perfidy to keep Black people in bondage. Chancellor Williams is the destruction of Black civilization. George G.M. James's Stolen Legacy. Asa G. Hilliard's The Awakening of the African Mind, which was mentioned earlier. Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, and the great books of Sheikh Anta Diop, The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality, and the economic and cultural basis for a federated state, Dr. Diop's effort to organize a united Africa. We read the classic Black Rage, written by Black psychiatrists Price Cobbs and William Greer. Cobbs and Greer found that their Black patients' mental health improved more rapidly when their treatment included information about Black history and achievements. Many more Black works have alerted us to the plans to keep us uneducated, ready for re-enslavement. The great Brazilian activist scholar Paulo Freire, in his classic Pedagogy of the Oppressed, expressed clearly the 3 major strategies used by oppressors. The first is physical conquest, such as European and Arabic invasion of African countries. Joyce King knows very well about that. The second is manipulation, convincing oppressed groups that the intentions of oppressors are positive, humane, and beneficial. Sometimes members of oppressed groups, even those certified as trustworthy, are employed to engage in manipulating their own brothers and sisters. The third strategy that Paulo Freire wrote about is cultural invasion. This strategy has major implications for the continuing educational oppression of African Americans. Under the strategy of cultural invasion, students are required to read materials, see images, and use language that celebrate and ennoble oppressors, and at the same time demeaning the oppressed. Freire's thesis could not have been more clearly understood than by what happened during a doctoral class in school administration that I taught at Atlanta University in 1976. It was then Atlanta University, not Clark Atlanta. At the very moment my students, many of them school principals, were reading and discussing Pedagogy of the Oppressed, students in South Africa revolted and refused to continue to be taught and forced to read and speak Afrikaans, the language of the Afrikaner oppressors. The South African government sent in troops that killed more than 500 students and their teachers. Most of the weapons of destruction of black South Africans came from Israel. It was the beginning of the end of white oppression in South Africa, climaxed by Nelson Mandela's release from prison, the ascent of the African National Congress, and the election of Mandela as president. The 500 students and their teachers died to free their nation. They did not die in vain. In America, most of us were not paying much attention to what was happening to our brothers and sisters in South Africa and other points and other parts of the African continent. The exception being the U.S. campaign waged by Randall Robinson, director of Trans-Africa. Dr. Adlai Sanford, conference chair, as we planned the program for our 1985 International Conference in New York City, and I will say we chose as the keynote speaker for that conference someone that I revered and that Dr. Sanford revered and mentioned by Dr. Jeffries tonight, Dr. John Henry Clark. There was nobody else that we could possibly have as the keynote speaker for this international conference. We also invited Randall Robinson to speak at our international conference. And when Randall was introduced, and we had 1,000 people, 1,000 teachers in the audience, there was just a slight smattering of applause. So I got up out of my president's chair and reintroduced Randall Robinson. I said, this is the brother who is leading the campaign to free Nelson Mandela, to free our brothers and sisters in South Africa. Then they woke up and they applauded Randall Robinson. But except for occasions like that, and I will also mention that I told the members of the National Alliance of Black School Educators that Randall would be helping us to march on the South African consulate. I had asked Lynn Jeffries if he would lead the 1,000 of us who were there over to the South African consulate shouting "Free Mandela." So I thank you, Lynn, for doing that. But by and large, the African American community was asleep, paying little attention to what was happening on the mother continent. And in America, most of us thought that the great civil rights movement, with the passage of the acts of 64 and 65, we were well along the way to equality in America. Few of us seemed to notice that the Democrats in the South had quickly become Republicans. We paid little attention to the message of Ronald Reagan's beginning his presidential campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, the site of the brutal murders of 2 white boys and 1 black youth from New York who were helping to do voter registration. That should have told us who Ronald Reagan was. Yet few of our black politicians, professors, teachers, and preachers were enlightening us. They let us continue to sleep. Neither was the now almost extinct Black Talk Radio informing us. There is something good that I will have to say about Black Talk Radio. There are many good things. But when I still lived in Chicago and Harold Washington was running for mayor, he didn't have any money to buy advertisements for television and signboards and so on. Had it not been for Black Talk Radio, Harold Washington could never have been elected mayor. So that's the good that I can say about Black Talk Radio. In the early 1980s, a number of education reform documents were published in the United States, the most prominent of which was A Nation at Risk, issued by the Reagan government. None of the reform reports said anything significant about black children and their needs. Therefore, on the night I was installed as the 8th president of the National Alliance of Black School Educators, November 1983, here in hometown Chicago, I announced the creation of a task force on black academic and cultural excellence. I appointed Dr. Asa G. Hilliard III as chair and Dr. Barbara A. Sizemore as co-chair. I also named psychologist Dr. Alfred B. Pasteur, and NABC appointed 7 other members to the task force. We thought it was critical for black people to understand our educational neglect and oppression and to take control of the education of our children, youth, and our communities. These brilliant, dedicated NABC scholars worked for a year and produced the monumental document that all participants of this summit have been asked to read, Saving the African American Child. Asa, Barbara, and Alfred are ancestors now, and I miss them very much. But their work lives on and inspires our being here tonight and drives our destiny to save our children, to save our people. Yet when Saving the African American Child was published in 1984, few black educators took it seriously. Almost all the black superintendents belonged to NABC, which was founded by black superintendents, yet none adopted it to transform education in their districts. The black superintendent of Memphis who was later elected mayor of Memphis, was asked by the city's most prominent newspaper what he thought of the task force report. His response, "I see no relationship between studying about Africa and learning mathematics." Dr. Shabazz, his own ignorance that mathematics was born in Africa. The black superintendent of Detroit chaired a major corporate-supported invitation-only conference in Miami. And he distributed every major reform document of the 1980s except thank you. I just wanted to check to see if you were listening. As an invited guest, I did not hesitate to call him out before the distinguished group. Hardly anybody believed that we expected higher standards for our children and youth than any other reform document expected for all American children. This was inconceivable. For example, we expected our children to complete algebra by the 6th grade and calculus by the 12th grade. We insisted that our students be able to use common English and to acquire a speaking, reading, and writing knowledge of at least one foreign language. No other major American educational document, past or present, had such expectations. But that's what Barbara and Asa and Al and the other 7 expected for our children. That's what I expected. We expected teachers and administrators of our children to be trained to help our children accomplish these high expectations. But just as black and white, later also Latino educators, failed to demand academic and cultural excellence for children of color, no boards of education and no schools of education took our recommendations seriously. Why would the ruling classes want any except their own children in private schools to accomplish such educational mastery? Why would superintendents and teachers of color defy the ruling classes? Where would most educators find the courage to give our children the education they deserve? Well, I will try to explain why that courage must be found to assure an education of liberation for African Americans. There are many factors that warn us that we are on the verge of academic and cultural captivity, that we don't have much time to sound the alarm and to act. At the end of the 20th century, in 1997, a group of powerful American neocons met to found PNAC, Project for a New American Century. The group included 23 very influential white men and one white woman. The neocons issued a statement of principles intended for U.S. world domination. People of African descent were then, as now, viewed expendable by neocon world philosophy. Sandra, you've read it, so you understand that. I know others in here have read the principles of PNAC. People of African descent were then, as now, viewed expendable by neocon world philosophy. Though they were not among the signers of PNAC principles, both Presidents Bush, the father and the son, Vice President Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and the Koch brothers have been identified as strong supporters of PNAC. I have no doubt that Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan are strong PNAC supporters. At the beginning of the 21st century, demographers told us that by the middle of this century, people of European descent would no longer be the majority in America. Latinos, African Americans, Asians, and Native Americans, in that order, would constitute the new American majority. The Census Bureau reports that the increasing number of babies of color now far outnumber the births of white babies. Let me try to make it plain. Most white politicians oppose a woman's right to choose to bear or not bear a child. Planned Parenthood is condemned, and under a Romney administration would receive no federal funding. The alarm for white politicians is that for every white baby aborted is the inevitability of a white minority looming ever closer. Now in 2012, we have reached the tipping point. The city of New York and its public schools are already the new people of color majority. Throughout the United States, people of color have become or are about to become the new majority in our largest cities and public school systems. The presence, yes, Sandra, the presence of a beautiful black family of high intellect and strong self-esteem in the White House is repugnant and threatening to many white people. Plans have been underway for some time for white people, the new minorities, to retain control of the politics and the economics of the nation through devices that now are already in place. The single most important control that is already underway and well planned is the education of people of color. Now keep that in mind. That is the single most important control mechanism that those presently in control see as the most important way to continue to control America. Let me say at the outset that the purpose of public education throughout the world is to promote the economic and political interests of the ruling classes. Accordingly, in the United States, education's role is to educate the masses sufficiently to propel the engines that keep the wealthy in luxurious comfort and in power. The public schools were never intended to prepare the children of the poor and the lower middle classes to think critically, to make decisions which are contrary to the interests of the super rich. The training of teachers and administrators makes it so. Curriculum makes it so. And punishment and rewards make it so. American people of all ethnicities who are not wealthy and who do not send their children to private schools are to have a common education that prepares them to be workers, to keep the 1% in control, and to fool lower-end white people to believe that they share that control. The overwhelming majority of our students of African ancestry are denied an education that will enable them to think critically. Above all, they are to be taught no truthful curricular content that would help our students to enhance their self-esteem by learning that they are the heirs of great Africans who were the first people, who created the first universities and taught almost all the academic subjects studied throughout the world today. Our students are to be accorded little dignity and no high expectations for achievement by most of their teachers. The plans for continued control of people of color are being supported by the billionaires, the Koch brothers, the Waltons, Bill and Linda Gates, Sheldon Adelson, and many other magnates, including hedge fund entrepreneurs. The tightening control has many facets, many dots to connect. The videos of the NBA, and they've been listed for you, and the video of Glenn Ford help to connect and understand the magnitude of the control mechanisms. I'll discuss some of the most important controls. First, the present and future curricula of many school systems has been designed by the conservative giant British conglomerate Pearson. Pearson also dominates the U.S. school testing market. In addition, Pearson is beginning to control teacher certification and teacher performance assessment. Pearson, in conjunction with Stanford University, has moved rapidly into the teacher certification and assessment market. More than 25 states and 90 teacher preparation programs have signed on to use the Pearson-Stanford teacher assessments. For example, a subdivision of Pearson called Pearson VUE, V-U-E, now prepares teacher certification examinations for New York State. The tentacles of Pearson are all over American education. The critically needed infusion of African-centered truthful curriculum will be a David versus Goliath war. The Pearson curriculum of compliance is intended to teach students to master information which does not require critical thinking. The federal and states governments have bought into the Pearson technologically delivered instruction. In addition, we're being blindsided by the federal government. To be sure, no state proposals which even hint of a curriculum of truth are being funded by the federal race to the top.
Different name, and this has served to just confuse us. When all is said and done, to be one's our revolution. We never stand alone.